Welcome to First Tuesday. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Jennifer Fenton, CE Training Coordinator from the Washington State Library, and I am glad that you could join us today for our First Tuesday session. So there I am, and today Carolyn is on the road, so she will not be joining us. And Jeremy is out today, but we are lucky to have Neon here who will be helping if you have any technical problems, and you can just send a chat message to him. And First Tuesdays is brought to you by the Washington State Library and the Institute of Museum and Library Services. Looks like you've all figured out how to use Illuminate, so we're going to jump right into our presentation. Today's presentation is on Romance Readers Advisory, and our presenters wish to introduce themselves, so I'm going to turn it right over to them. Please welcome our Timberland presenters.
Hi, this is Nancy Schutz. I'm Timberland's Training and Staff Development Coordinator. Just about 20 years ago, a friend loaned me a copy of Jude Devereaux's A Knight in Shining Armor, and I've been hooked on romances ever since.
Hi, I'm Kim Storbeck, and I'm the Adult Nonfiction Selector at Timberland Regional Library. I'm also a longtime reader of romances like Nancy, and while I read a variety of romance genres, my favorites are historical Regencies. So we're going to talk just for a moment about what we hope that you'll get out of this webinar. We hope to improve your understanding of the romance genre and its readers, so that you're better equipped to provide them readers' advisory assistance. We also hope that you will understand the range of available romance novels and what the reader wants in a book. We hope to increase your comfort level as you help romance readers find that next book. And we want to show you the resources that are available to you for Romance Readers Advisory and make suggestions as to how you can make yourself and your libraries more romance-friendly.
And lastly, we want you to realize the importance of your attitude towards the genre and how that impacts the Reader's Advisory conversation. I really want to stress the importance of this last outcome, dealing with librarian attitude. In Joyce Sarex's 2009 book, The Reader's Advisory Guide to Genre Fiction, she cautions that we only have about 5 seconds to connect positively with a romance reader. Romance readers are accustomed to being looked down upon, and we need to learn ways to indicate immediately that we've read in the genre and that we are someone that they can talk to about their favorite books. To quote Joyce, "Readers do not expect us to be fans. They expect us to be fellow readers and to appreciate what they enjoy, whatever that is. We are simply required to smile and invite the readers to share information about the kind of book they are seeking." Acknowledging that we have read romances breaks the ice and allows us to continue a conversation with the reader. End of quote. At Timberland, we developed our 2-hour face-to-face training knowing that there are many, many romance readers using our libraries, and also that many of our staff find it challenging to help these romance readers find new titles and authors. Also, acknowledging the importance of connecting with the readers, when we do our romance genre training, we ask participants to read at least one romance prior to attending. When Jennifer asked us to share our romance training with you in a webinar, we had to do some major adapting. Our training is extremely hands-on and interactive. In fact, we don't even use PowerPoint. It's been very well received, and it's actually been a lot of fun. So we hope you gained some useful information this morning and that, as much as possible, you enjoy yourself. Thanks for joining us.
Okay, so let's get started off with a basic question. What makes a romance a romance? There are many books out there that might be considered romantic, but that would not be placed into the romance category. Here are the 5 main characteristics of a romance novel. First is the love story. This is the central driving force of the story. There may be vampires running around, or marauding pirates, or Amish driving a buggy, but the love story between the main characters comes first. Secondly, in a romance novel, there will be a firm commitment between the 2 main characters in the end. This doesn't mean that they're married, but the promise of the happy ever after is there. This is where the clear division between romantic books and romance books becomes really clear. There are lots of romantic books. Think Dear John by Nicholas Sparks, or The Bridges of Madison County by Robert Waller. These books have a bevy of romance, but the characters are not together in the end. This happily ever after The promise of commitment is a key point in romance books and why romance readers read them. Romance readers read for the satisfaction they get from the resolution of a love story, so romance novels have to be emotionally engaging. Readers have to care about the characters. If you don't like them, you won't care whether they end up together in the end. I've put down many books that, for whatever reason, I could not engage in. And yes, romance books are predictable, in that you know that the hero and heroine are going to have their happily ever after. What is not predictable is how they will get there. Setting, time period, and other elements are as varied as other fiction, but the result is not. Readers do not expect to be surprised by the resolution, but they do want an interesting story to how they get there. I think a lot of people have the idea that romance novels are all about the alpha male rescuing the female. While this used to be true a lot of the time, it is no longer the standard. Strong heroines and heroes are the norm in today's romances. There is a strong notion of female empowerment in today's stories. You will also find themes of women dealing with tricky personal or professional issues such as divorce, abuse, children, job loss, harassment, etc. These strong women get out of these situations, usually based on their own talents and intelligence. They don't need the hero to save them. Many times, they save the hero in some way. And lastly, romance books feature a monogamous love story between two people. There is no messing around in the average romance. It does not create sympathy for the characters and would limit the emotional engagement for most readers. So those are the 5 main characteristics of a romance novel. Nancy's next going to talk about how these characteristics coexist with traditional reader's advisory appeals.
In our basic Reader's Advisory training that we offer to all of our staff at Timberland, we emphasize having a conversation with patrons to determine what it is they're looking for in a book. We ask them to tell us about books that they've read and enjoyed previously in an attempt to learn what appeals to them, why they like certain books. While there are a number of appeals or reasons why a reader might like certain books more than others, we focus on 4 major appeals: story, character, setting or frame, and language. But this is not the case with romance novels. The overriding appeal of the romance novel are those characteristics that Kim just described. They focus on the relationship, they end happily, they're emotionally engaging, etc. These characteristics are why people read romance novels. But that said, let's briefly take a look at these traditional appeals and how they relate to the romance novel. So first of all, story. It focuses on the romantic relationship, which usually features some misunderstanding that drives the protagonists apart, but is always followed by a satisfying conclusion. The characters grow and mature as a result. The story is usually fast-paced with lots of dialogue. Because of this, romance novels, and this is one of their appeals, can easily be put down and picked up. The stories will have varying levels of sensuality, and this is something that can play a huge part in whether someone likes a particular book or not. We will talk more about this in a few minutes. The stories, like Kim said, can address a variety of moral and social issues, whether it's child, spousal abuse, alcoholism, racial discrimination. This applies to historical as well as contemporary romances. In the historical romances, they would feature whatever social ills were prevalent during that particular time period. Character. Obviously, since romance novels focus on the relationship, the characters are very important. Characters, rather than plot twists, drive romances. More and more, the stories are told from the point of view of both protagonists, the heroine and the hero. If a romance reader does not like the characters, they will not like the book. Setting and frame. The landscapes of the romance novel are more varied than those of most other genres. They can be set in small towns or big cities, ranches or corporate boardrooms. They can be in medieval to Regency to Western to alternate universes. There will be some readers who enjoy and want stories set in recognizable areas. Here in the Northwest, we have Debbie Maycomber and Susan Mallory that write about the Northwest. Some novels feature certain careers or hobbies. Immediately, Debbie Maycomber's knitting stories come to mind, and also, especially in Jane Ann Krentz's older ones, she would feature maybe photography or computers in each novel. Some readers have a definite preference for the time frame in which books are set. They may only want Regencies. They may only want contemporaries. Or they may like alternate realities, and that can mean futuristic, paranormal, time travel, or other. Lastly, language. The language in a romance novel is rich in its ability to describe intense emotion, strong sensual attraction, and acute physical awareness. The repartee between the hero and the heroine is very important. Communication is key to the success of a romance novel, so again, there's a lot of dialogue. And usually there's not as much description as one typically finds in other genres. So that's it for the major appeals and how they are connected to romance novels. Now for a little romantic history. First of all, we want to make sure you understand that love stories have existed since the earliest times. They're in the Bible, they're in Greek myths. But there is general agreement that the direct antecedent of today's romances is, and you see the picture there, the 1740 epistolary novel by Samuel Richardson entitled Pamela or Virtue Rewarded. This was an extremely popular novel in which a young servant resists repeated attempts on her virtue by Mr. B, and as a result ends up marrying him. And then as you can see in the timeline there, we had the Gothic romances in the 1700s, historical romances in the 1800s with traditional historicals like Pride and Prejudice, which was published in 1813, and then the beginning of contemporary romances in the 1900s with Grace Livingston Hill being one of the most famous and enduring authors. The 1960s saw brooding castles with authors like Victoria Holt, Phyllis Whitney, and Barbara Michaels. From the 1970s to the present, the romance genre has exploded. There have been an ever-increasing number of titles and authors. There are more subgenres. There's more blending of genres. More novels are coming out in hardback. And the authors are becoming more involved in the promotion of their books and more accessible and visible thanks to Facebook, their websites, etc. And actually, the current fascination with the romance novel is unprecedented. So, who reads romances? A lot of people who do not fit any stereotype. Readers' ages range from young adolescents to seniors. The ages tracked in a study a number of years ago were from ages 13 to 74 years. And while there were some fluctuations, the implications were clear. Romance readers come in all ages, and once they start with the genre, they seem to stick with it. Take a look at those last 4 bullets. The percentages included here do a good job of countering some of the preconceived stereotypes of romance readers. We have 79% currently involved with a man, 66% own their own home, 51% work outside the home, and 42% have a bachelor's degree or higher. There are definitely a lot of romance readers out there, and they are avid readers. Most enjoy books from other genres, and 70% are likely to follow an author they like into a new subgenre. They are heavy consumers who are passionate about reading. In one survey of romance readers, nearly 50% reported that they read more than 7 books a month. To find out just how heavy and how passionate they are, look at these startling statistics. Over the 10-year period from 1998 to 2008, romance readers grew by nearly 34 million, from 41 million readers to 74.8 million. In 2008, nearly 25% of all Americans read a romance novel. So romances are very, very popular. And in fact, if looking at this pie chart, you'll see that they're more popular than any other genre. This pie chart we made this from the source was Business of Consumer Book Publishing 2010. So romance fiction sales generated $1.36 billion in sales in 2009. In 2009, 9,089 new romance novels were released. And romance in 2009 was the second top performing category on the New York Times, USA Today, and Publishers Weekly bestseller list, beat only by the movie tie-in category. And it's estimated that for this year, 2010, romance fiction sales should be about $1.35 billion, which is very close to what it was in 2009. So even in this economy, romance novels are selling very well. And in fact, Harlequin recently posted a 22.5 increase in sales. So we'd like to get some input from you at this point. We know you've probably heard criticisms. Maybe you've felt critical of the romance genre, or seen things, or just the impressions that you have. So if you could just in the chat box put some criticisms or some preconceived stereotypes that you might have about romance readers or the romance genre. Okay, well we'll deal with the ones you come up with in a minute, but here's the ones that we came with. And before I start, I'd like to quote from a speech that Jane Ann Krentz gave in 2000. Few people realize how much courage it takes for a woman to open a romance novel on an airplane. Not only are the books seen as trash, but the women who read them are seen as not quite bright. So even though none of the other genres seem to need defending, romance apparently does. So here we go on the defensive. Okay, first, they're all the same. They're formulaic. If you've read one, you've read them all. There is no formula. We have to recognize that there is a big difference between the conventions of a genre and being formulaic. All fiction genres have certain conventions or expectations on the part of the reader. Yes, romance novels have a pattern or structure, as do mysteries. As we've seen, they simply share certain common elements or characteristics. That leaves a lot of room for different variables, which disproves the mistaken assumption that they're all alike.
One thing I do want to mention about the formulaic is I think that could be used to describe what's known as category romances. Category romances are those small Harlequin lines that you'll find in a grocery store, and I think that's what many romance haters think of when they think of romance. The writers of these stories are under a lot of restrictions depending on what they're writing for, a Western line, suspense, NASCAR, whatever. So they are definitely following a formula in that way. That being said, we're not really talking about those books in our presentation here today because a lot of libraries don't buy those and people don't expect to come into our libraries and find those.
Okay, they disempower women, and Tim has already touched on this a bit. The idea that women in romance novels are weak, that they need to be rescued, they're subservient and or in abusive relationships. The stereotype of being rescued by a knight on a shining steed is totally untrue of the modern romance novel. The romance heroines never wait around to be rescued. Despite what life throws at the heroine, she always pulls through. Her life has purpose, and she is usually the one who tames the man. No self-respecting romance heroine would stay in an abusive relationship. And to quote Jane Ann Krentz again, in romance novels, women understand perfectly that they can exist without men. They know very well that they don't need a man to take care of them. That is never the issue in a romance novel. It is not the point of the books. Romance novels that try to make that statement in a loud way never do well in the genre because that is not why the reader comes to this kind of fiction. End of quote. Okay, they all end happily. Yes, they do. That's the point. We know it's going to end with happily ever after, so why read it? Because it's the process, not the conclusion that we're reading for. Romances offer a safe way to experience a broad range of emotions. Reading them is a form of escape. Yes, but this is not a negative concept, and it's not particular to romances. People escape into solving a mystery, traveling on a spaceship, being a cowboy in the Old West. It's the same concept and serves a purpose just like vacations, games, hobbies. In the current economic situation, publishers are seeing strong sales, increased sales in the romance genre, and it's healthy for people to have this outlet. They're not literary enough, not as good or as well written as other fiction genres. Well, it is what it is. That the reader enjoys reading it should be enough. We're not in any way saying that there aren't bad romances out there. There are. But this is no reason to dismiss the entire genre. It's all about sex. Of course it is. So, actually, I'm kidding. Anyone who reads and enjoys romances knows that this isn't the case. If readers do not like the characters or do not get emotionally involved in the story, they won't continue reading, no matter how great the sex might be. There is a wide range of sensuality, from totally chaste to extremely steamy. But the main focus is on the love story and how the protagonists get together. Now, in erotica, it is all about the sex, which will dominate the story almost as the main character. As a main character. These are not the novels we're talking about. We're talking about mainstream romances. And lastly, they're emotional. Yes, they are. And that's one of the reasons so many readers enjoy them and continue reading them.
So there were a couple of comments that people chatted in. Jennifer very nicely said they're fluffy, and yes they are. And Robin said she was surprised by a male board member or chair who turned out to read romances. And about 10% of the people who read romances are male, according to a recent survey. So they may be closet romance readers, or they may read books that they wouldn't consider to be a romance, but has a strong love story in the book. And Gina says something, maybe fluff, but she reads mystery fluff. So that's the same thing. You know, the escape into a mystery is the same as the escape into a romance. The formula of a mystery being solved is kind of the same thing as the romance ending happily. So we all have the things that we like to read. And I read romances. I read a little bit of mysteries now too, but we all have our own forms of escape. So anything else to add, Nancy?
Nope,
Okay.
I think that's it.
So we're going to do a little exercise that we actually do in our training, and we tried to modify it as much as we could for this this medium. So I'm going to be talking about romance subgenres in just a moment. But first we're going to do an exercise in judging a book by its cover, and we call this Let's Be Judgmental. So what I want you to do is look at this book cover, and it's Eloisa James, A Kiss at Midnight. And you have 5 choices. You have, is this a contemporary, a historical, an inspirational, a paranormal, or romantic suspense, just by looking at the book cover. So under the participant window, you'll see A, B, C, D, E. So what I want you to do is click on the corresponding letter of what you think that this book is about. So I'll give you just a few seconds. All right. All right, so most of you chose the historical, and that is correct. Let's do the next one. This is Love in the Time of Dragons by Katie McAllister. So contemporary, historical, inspirational, paranormal, or romantic suspense. Take it away. Okay, I'm going to publish the results. All right. This is actually a paranormal, which a couple of you got and a couple of you didn't. Anytime you see dragons, it's going to be paranormal. Let's do the next one. And this is Beverly Lewis, book called The Longing. So same choices again. Wow, I think that was a pretty obvious one, which is the point. So I'm going to skip publishing that since you all got it right. And this one here is Deborah Webb. It's called Nameless. And it looks like Gina's having a problem there. Okay, this one is actually let's see, contemporary, we had contemporary and we had romantic suspense. This is actually a romantic suspense, and we joke that romantic suspense books tend to have a one-word title and somebody looking scared on the cover, or there's usually somebody running or somebody with a gun, but it usually has a dark color with some scary-looking elements on the cover. And our last one is Jennifer Cruzy, and it's called Bet Me. So this is our last one. So go ahead and make your choice. All right. Okay, it looks like you guys did good on that one too. Process of elimination, as Nancy says. Yes, I probably should have a couple more. So yes, this one is a contemporary, and Jennifer Cruzy is a big name in contemporary romance writing. And anytime you see high heels or bikinis or lots of bare legs, that tends to be a contemporary book. So we're joking a little bit with this exercise, and we actually found this in I believe it was a book list article. And we use this activity in our regular training session for a few different reasons. One is to break up the lecture, and two is to get staff familiar with using covers as a clue to what the book may be about. If you're in the stacks with a patron and you're quickly trying to figure out what the book is about, this can be helpful. It's not always right, of course, but it's interesting to see how often that it is right. We usually show about 15 to 20 covers, and you can definitely see the differences between the subgenres coming out in that way. Okay. So I'm going to go over in a little detail about the different subgenres that you will find in romance. And so first off, let's talk about contemporary. A contemporary romance is anything set after 1945 and in any location. Authors in this subgenre have a lot of latitude in plot elements, length, and explicitness in these stories. Contemporary romance and other subgenres as well can come in single titles or what can be described as linked series. Romance series don't necessarily fall under the same definition of a traditional fiction series. The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo trilogy, for example, is a series in that the main character is the same throughout and the stories flow one to the other. Romance books are different in that each has that happy ending. The main characters are together. What does the writer do then? In a linked series, they pull some minor characters from one story and make them the major characters in the next. So the created world is the same, but the focus shifts from one couple to the next. I'm going to diverge here just for a moment and mention those category romances again. These books are generally divided into different lines like contemporary, westerns, romantic suspense, etc. They might release several titles a month within each line. And many readers subscribe directly to these series, and your library probably gets a lot of them as donations, as ours do. There are a lot of restrictions on word count and plot elements in these product lines. Many romance authors get their start writing for these category romances and then move into their own single titles or linked series where they have a lot more latitude in these writing elements. Next are historical romances. Historical romances are set in any time period prior to 1945 and can occur in any location. They can be westerns set on a ranch in the Oregon Territory, a medieval tale set in a Scottish castle, or a Victorian-era romance of manners. Another time period you'll find is the Regency, which is one of the most popular and enduring romance publishing categories. Regency refers to the Regency period in England, technically 1811 to 1820. Regencies can get tricky because it's important to note that there are two types of Regencies. First are the traditional Regencies. These are the ones that came out of the period, like Pride and Prejudice, or ones that are written like them. Wit, correct social mores, and historical detail are important elements in these tales. They are generally shorter and more innocent and contain no explicit sex. Historical Regencies are set in the same time period and contain much of the same wit and historical details, but they tend to be more sexually explicit, and the heroines are more likely to be at odds with the social mores of the time. They may be doing and thinking things that women at the time were forbidden to do, such as engaging in a social cause or even just going somewhere without a chaperone. Inspirational romances. Religious and spiritual beliefs are a major part of the romantic relationship. They can happen in any time period or setting, but the beliefs take a central role in the story. It's a very popular subgenre right now, particularly the Amish romances, which have become known as bonnet rippers instead of bodice rippers. The tension in the Amish romances is usually between a relationship between the Amish and an outsider. Inspirational romances may be clean and gentle, but they won't work for everyone who wants that clean and gentle aspect because of the faith aspect of the story. Next are paranormal romances. In paranormal romances, fantasy elements and paranormal happenings are an integral part of the plot. Alternate realities, vampires, demons, werewolves, ghosts, psychic abilities, witches, time travel, etc. Anything that you can think of. This subgenre shows no sign of slowdown. It's fueled by the popularity of books like Twilight in the beginning, and it just keeps going. Last category is romantic suspense. The romantic suspense subgenre has mystery, thriller, and suspense elements, but the romance still comes first. Just like the Regencies that I talked about before, romantic suspense can be divided into a couple of different camps. Traditional romantic suspense was a romance with a hint of danger. Violence was usually hinted at or suggested, but rarely described in detail. Classic authors who write like this are Phyllis Whitney, Victoria Holt, and Daphne du Maurier. There was a change in the 1980s with books becoming more explicit with strong language, graphic violence, and sex. Some of the authors who write in this style are J.D. Robb, Sandra Brown, and Suzanne Brockman. Many of these authors started in the romance genre and moved into romantic suspense, and some have now moved out of the romantic suspense as well, as their stories no longer hold romance at the core of the story. Tammy Hoag and Iris Johansson are a few examples of this. If a reader asks you for a romantic suspense title, it is a good idea to ask what kind of romantic suspense they're looking for. Ask if they've read something in the genre. If they say they love Phyllis Whitney, do not give them a Tammy Hoag. So those are the main subgenres that you'll find in romance publishing. As you can see, the worlds that are created are extremely varied. Some readers prefer one subgenre over another, while others read across these elements. Finding out if a reader has a subgenre preference is part of the Reader's Advisory conversation, which Nancy will be talking about next.
One thing to remember about, again, about your how important your attitude is, but also, and we stress this in our regular Reader's Advisory training, is that this conversation is not about you, and it's not about your personal reading or your preferences. And we also, one reason it's nice to do the activity about what you can, how you can judge a book by a cover, is that you need to be able to really expand what you know about books and what books you know about without having to actually read them. So it's not based on your personal reading. One thing that makes the romance Reader's Advisory much easier is you don't have to get at the appeals. As I mentioned earlier, you don't have to figure out if it's story that they like or language or setting. Mainly, if they like romances, you already know a lot about what they're looking for in a book. But there are three things that we do need to know, that we do need to figure out by having that conversation with the patron. First of all, you have to know, what does this reader mean by romance? Oftentimes, if a patron has previously encountered a negative reaction when they've asked for a romance novel, or if they're embarrassed about reading romances, they may not say, I'm looking for a romance. They may not call them that. They may say they want something light, they want a beach read. They may even say a love story. And we call this romance denial. So they could be experiencing romance denial. So does he or she mean a paperback Harlequin or a Danielle Steele? Do they want what we consider a romance novel, or a novel with romantic elements? We have to put our definition and understanding of the genre aside and work with whatever information they're giving to us, what they're providing. If they say that Steele writes romances, then give them more books like Danielle Steele. Secondly, does this reader want a book in a specific subgenre? Do they want one set in a particular time? Do they want historical or contemporary? I hesitate to say most, but many romance readers enjoy a variety of time periods, and they do read across the subgenres. And that's been my experience. I mean, that's what I do personally, and that's what, in helping patrons, that's what I have found. And lastly, and the hardest part is, how much sex does the reader want, or how much sex will they tolerate? This is crucial information, and it's not just simply how much or how little or how graphic. Sometimes one very graphic interlude leaves readers feeling that this is a very sexy book. The real point is the intensity and frequency of the sexual encounters and when they occur in the story. If they occur in the beginning, before the reader really knows the heroine and hero and cares about them, it might be too much. Whereas if the same interludes occur further along in the story, it might be totally acceptable. And one caution, very often patrons will say that they do not like much sex, but then they go on to name favorite authors who we recognize as writing novels with considerable sexual content. So this is probably the most difficult piece of information to figure out. And usually it's a little too awkward to just come out and ask, how much sex do you like? We definitely don't want to ask this question. So you might offer a variety of titles and see what they read and liked. Their answers may indicate the level of sensuality that they prefer or that they're comfortable with. Recognizing that this is awkward, we encourage each person to individually come up with some descriptive words that you're comfortable using when having the conversation and trying to get at this information. You might ask, are you looking for something more innocent or something spicy? Let them tell you where they are on that spectrum. Some other examples of words to use or consider using are sweet, gentle, mild, tame, PG-13, or spicy, hot, explicit, steamy, or sensual. And another caution is, do not make assumptions based on, for example, the apparent age of the patron. We have found many older romance readers who like very spicy, very steamy novels.
Okay, so what are the existing resources that are available to help you right now? One of the handouts that have been provided for this webinar today are a list of these resources and suggestions for what to do next. An excellent book to get if you don't already have it is the Reader's Advisory Guide to Genre Fiction, the second edition by Joyce Sarix. This book has wonderful sections on all the genres, but particularly for our purpose today on romance and romantic suspense. So a great introduction to the genre, plus great author lists and books that you can suggest to your patrons. There are a lot of websites out there, including general fiction sites, publisher websites, author websites. Many authors either have their own websites or participate in some sort of social media. For example, I get updates from Julia Quinn, Christina Dodd, Lisa Claypass, and others on my Facebook page. So if a new book is coming out, I hear about it. If somebody else is publishing a book, they're cross-posting for each other. Some of these authors have 20,000 or more people who have liked them on Facebook, so it's a really good resource. And that's how your readers are learning about these books. Use your romance readers as a resource, and this could be your patrons and also other staff. They will give you suggestions if you just get that conversation going. One of the resources that we've made available for our staff at Timberland is a binder. Nancy and I created this binder of resources. It contains information on romances, articles about the genre, lists of authors divided by subgenres, and suggested title lists. And as we see new things, we send these new articles or lists out to the libraries that have this binder that have come to our training. So example, we just updated some of our romance award lists and sent those out. We also have made a couple lists of young adult romances, which are different from adult romances because the characters are at a different life stage. So they're not necessarily going to end up together with the happily ever after. And those lists are really visual with book covers and a description of the story. So again, each of our libraries that has come to that training get that binder. And it's a lot of work to do that, but it might be something to consider if you have a a person who's interested in maintaining something that, and I say maintain because it does have to be kept up to date to make it the most useful. So we're really glad that you took the time here today to listen to this presentation, particularly if you're new to the genre. This is a start to making you and your library more romance friendly. So what else can you do? Your library should buy romances if it doesn't already. Don't be afraid of paperbacks. This is the format that they come in. Read something in the genre if you haven't done so already. Being able to say to a romance reader that you've read something in their genre goes a long way. In our training at Timberland, we ask everyone to read a romance before the training, and then we give them time to discuss it once they're in our training. And a lot of the times we have people who come in, they've never read a romance, and they sit there and go, that was a great book. I never would have picked it up unless I'd done this training. Keep an eye out in the professional literature about romance, at least for a while, to get a sense of what is happening. Booklist just did a romance spotlight in the September 15th issue. Publishers Weekly has done some really good articles this year about trends in romance fiction. And you don't have to do this forever, but maybe just for the next couple of months, just keep an eye out for new things that are coming out. Displays. This is great passive reader's advisory. You can do a large display, which will go a long way in making your romance readers feel loved, or even just do some face-outs on your fiction shelves. And this is something that you can go out to your library right now and do today. After you leave this training, walk out to your fiction shelves, find some romances, and face them out. Create some bookmarks. You can leave these on display for your patrons for the Passive Readers Advisory, or even place them in books. Say you do a bookmark of romantic suspense, and you have a variety of authors. Find some of those authors and slip those bookmarks into those books. So then your reader has it right at their fingertips when they're looking for that next title. Do some romance programs with local romance authors. The Romance Writers of America has a speakers bureau who can hook you up with romance writers in your area. We are very fortunate to have a bevy of romance writers in Western Washington.
Also, when we were getting ready to start this training, we contacted the Romance Writers of America, and they sent us a lot of freebies. So you might consider that. We got lots of mugs and bags and things like that. So again, we can't emphasize enough how important your attitude is, and that we all know this, and we do this all the time, but we do need to respect the reading habits of our patrons, even if it's not something that we would read. So readers will return to staff they trust. If they have a rapport with you, they will come and ask again for help finding a book. And oftentimes we don't see romance readers because they're pretty self-sufficient in finding books, or maybe they're buying a lot of their books, or maybe they don't feel comfortable asking us for assistance. But as more and more romance readers start turning to their libraries because of the economy, we definitely want to welcome them, and we want to help them find that next book. So we hope you got some ideas out of this webinar, and we would like you to start using the resources and ideas right now. We encourage you, if you're working in your branch today, to leave your computer, get up out of your seat, and go and display a few romances. So does anybody have any questions?
The what? Okay. That's great. Somebody did ask a question about whether there were going to be slides later and handouts, and Jennifer did reply that the session is being archived, and also the handouts were sent to the first Tuesday list. Nancy and I provided some of our things from the binder that we have, some lists by authors by subgenre and a couple other things. We're happy to share some other things that we've put together. If you're interested, our emails are on this last slide, and we're happy to send you anything that we've put together if you would find it useful.
And Robin mentions that they use Christian book distributors for their inspirational romances. And we have a question. Could you please recommend guides for patrons who would like to write romances themselves? I have suggested Writer's Digest and blogs to a few people, but would like to know if there are other helpful resources.
Sorry, my mic was off. There are some books that have been published specifically for writing romances, but I don't remember any of the titles right now. It hasn't been something that I've paid a lot of attention to. I know the Romance Writers of America website has a lot of has some information for people who are wanting to write romances, and there are a couple of groups in Western Washington. There's the Romance Writers of Puget Sound group that is, I think, an offshoot of the Romance Writers of America that has some resources as well. But I think there are a couple of current books about specifically writing romances, just like there's other books about writing science fiction or mysteries.
I would also suggest contacting the Romance Writers of America and asking for people near whoever this person is. I know that in one of our branches here, just a patron just won an award for a romance novel that she published, and she was very, very active in a local group. So I think that it would be very useful to get in contact with other people that were writing romances.
And Robin mentions that Jane Ann Prince has written something on writing romances. Thank you for that great presentation, Nancy and Kim. And are there any other questions